Well, I mean, it started in that when I first got the book contract, my editor was like, write us, I had given her I'd sent her a prototype. I'd made a prototype of this graphic novel and I'd
Mm-hmm.
sent it to her and she was basically like, well, it was only 60 pages long. And she was like, I want to publish this, but let's do it as, write an outline
Mm-hmm.
about, and it had sort of the characters essentially that are in the book now, some fewer of them, but there were some of the characters. And so I wrote an outline, and it was basically, I drew from my childhood, obviously. And one of the things that I did when I was in high school was I took a class in existentialism. And I put that in there. And then I thought, and then as the project continued, I felt like it became a literary device for me because it took questions that were about immigrants and being a child of immigrants. I wasn't really interested necessarily in looking at that dynamic in the same way, and I wanted a device that would help me ask some of those questions but broaden it out and make it a little bit more universal and be able to touch upon potentially ideas of identity but also collective American identity as well as Asian American identity, etc. It pushed some of those questions in an elegant way, I thought.
Right. It was
Right.
so much more than just the regular diaspora struggle that I'm sure many teenagers face, but it was like at the end of the day, she's in high school and high school's hard and it was
Well,
just
I'm
so
happy you
cool.
say that, but I
Yeah.
feel like when I used to explain the book, people's eyes would glaze over. Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to write a graphic novel, and I mean, I should say in total honesty, I had written. I mean, some of the characters had been in my mind. Oops, hello, are
Yeah,
you
you're
there?
there. I've got yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Some of the characters had been in my mind for a while, and I'd written some scrappy script about it in graduate school. But I mean, it was very much a decision where I wanted to write a graphic novel. Had I wanted to make a film, I would have made a film, but was interested in making a graphic novel. And I
Right.
also felt that there were certain ideas in the book that would lend themselves very well to a graphic novel format that you couldn't do in film. She and I are very close friends,
Mm-hmm.
and we weren't before we started working on it. The way I approached it essentially was because I'd been making films for a long time. Approached it kind of the way I made films, and I essentially wrote a script and then broke it down, and then she and I visual language by which to tell the story in a way that seemed better. So that was basically, it took 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and there's close to 1,000 drawings. So, and that's the fraction of what we did. So a lot of it was just, frankly, trial and error. I mean, Reza knows this. I've known him for a while. He knows when I got the book deal, and I know for years. I mean, he must have been just like, what the hell are they doing? But it was like it just took a really long time, and a
Yeah.
lot of it was just back and forth. And it's my story, so a lot of it was also figuring out how to get what I want. And Mari was extremely collaborative in that respect, and she understood that it was my story. I don't know, we just connected in a very nice, sort of healthy way, I thought. I definitely wrote the script and broke it down, but because I knew that I was working with Mari and I know her work really well, and we'd done this prototype, I wrote kind of, to her strengths,
Mm-hmm.
which is that she's not a comic book illustrator, she's a painter,
Mm-hmm.
and a slightly surreal abstract painter in that sense. And so I wanted to utilize some of those strengths. I've sort of fell in love. She used to have these. There were these acrylic portraits in her portfolio that were just really peculiar and like so emotionally resonant. And I just wanted to speak to that. Like I feel like she's capable of drawing a lot of emotion in her characters' faces with very little clutter. A lot.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot. I mean, I don't have a brother and sister. I have two brothers. They're very different from the characters in the book. My parents, to a certain extent, are similar. A lot of the people I drew from, my past, my high school, my current life. I mean, definitely. But it's the life of a 15-year-old, and I'm in my 30s, and so it's kind of like, I had to kind of take this, that, and the other. So my cousin was 15 when I first started working on it, so a lot of it was bouncing ideas off of her, and she's very much has a kind of Tina vibe to her too, and so I felt like I would meet her friends and hang out with her, and it was fun. I have to say, I mean, even in the years that I've been working on this book, though America has changed so much in terms of the way demographics have shifted, the way 9/11 has kind of shaped our culture, the fact that we have a black president. I mean, there's just so many aspects to all of this that are so different from when I was growing up, in the 80s and 90s. So it was really a much, maybe I would have been more vigilant, or kind of, I may have been more interested in asserting my identity as opposed to doing something that was more broad.
Mm-hmm.
I write constantly. So, but I don't know. Journaling has not been, in the last few years, I haven't been journaling all that much. Although I do intermittently keep a journal to Henry Miller. I had this interview with the Nervous Breakdown, which is a literary magazine. They were like, do you keep any, I mean, if you were going to write a diary to somebody else, who would you write it to? And I was like, oh my God, this is so weird. But I do happen to keep a diary to Henry Miller. And it's like, not regular, but one day I'm going to compile them all and send them to like McSweeney's or something. But they're basically like these letters. I don't know. They just started because I sort of love the same places that he loves. And I love his kind of anarchist. And I also find him ridiculous and reprehensible and totally sexist. So I don't know. There must be something in me that wants to write letters to dead, white intellectuals. So. I mean, I think the one thing that I might say to that end is just that I like the way these conversations are going, in terms of even the conversations that have been sparked during the tour, which is talking really about identity beyond just sort of, I like the idea of talking about a collective American identity. And that's very interesting to me. And what happens when you have a culture that is full of so many different opposing forces? To me, what was interesting about existentialism is that Sartre was writing, while I think it is in many ways a flawed philosophy, I think that Sartre was writing, and a limited one, but I think Sartre was writing during the 1940s in France that was a much different society than the kind of society that we're living in right now, which is incredibly diverse and difficult. And so how do you figure out who you are? How do you figure out who your authentic self is when you've constantly got a barrage of new information coming at you all the time? And by that, I don't mean, internet and that kind of a thing. I mean, just on a daily basis, you're dealing with so many different types of people.